The Diary and Myrtle Warren. Tom Riddle's first Horcrux began where all his darkness started, inside Hogwarts. By his 5th year, Tom had already uncovered the legend of the Chamber of Secrets and discovered he was the true heir of Salazar Slytherin. He could speak Parseltongue, the ancient language of snakes, and he used that gift to open the chamber for the first time in centuries. Inside, he found Slytherin's monster, the Basilisk, a serpent so deadly one look could kill. Riddle didn't just see a monster, he saw a weapon and an opportunity. He began using the Basilisk to purge the school of students he believed unworthy to study magic, Muggleborns. But one attack didn't go as planned. A girl named Myrtle Warren accidentally crossed its path in the second-floor bathroom. The Basilisk's stare killed her instantly, giving Hogwarts its first ghost with plumbing trauma. That death became the first deliberate act of murder in Tom Riddle's life, and the moment he crossed the line from brilliant student to future Dark Lord. Using Myrtle's death, he performed the Horcrux ritual for the first time, tearing his soul apart and trapping a fragment of it inside a small black diary. To anyone else, it looked like an ordinary notebook, but to Tom, it was much more, a piece of immortality. The diary could literally think, speak, and manipulate others. Decades later, it would possess Ginny Weasley, reopening the chamber and nearly killing again. The choice of a diary wasn't random. It was the perfect symbol of his teenage arrogance, a record of his greatness, something he believed future generations would use to admire and revive him. The diary was the first of 7 Horcruxes, and proof that Voldemort's hunger for power had become something darker than ambition. It had become obsession. The ring and Voldemort's father. After leaving Hogwarts, Tom Riddle began searching for artifacts that connected him to the founders of Hogwarts and to his bloodline. But before he could immortalize himself again, he wanted revenge. Tom grew up in an orphanage after his mother died moments after giving birth to him. He believed his father, Tom Riddle Sr., had abandoned her before he was born. When he learned the truth from his uncle Morphin Gaunt, everything changed. His father was a wealthy muggle who lived just outside Little Hangleton, and his mother, Merope Gaunt, had bewitched him with a love potion. Once the potion wore off, Tom Sr. fled, leaving her penniless and pregnant. Technically, Voldemort was born from a love potion, which explains the zero chemistry in all his relationships. To Tom Riddle, that was unforgivable. The idea that a muggle could reject a witch, his mother, was an insult to everything he believed about blood purity. He stole Morphin's wand, traveled to his father's mansion, and murdered his father along with his paternal grandparents, Tom and Mary Riddle. It was his first act of mass murder, and the one that erased his muggle lineage from existence. He framed Morphin for the killings, altering his memories so thoroughly it was basically Inception, but with more murder and less Leonardo DiCaprio. Afterward, Tom returned to the Gaunt shack and claimed a ring that once belonged to his grandfather, Marvolo Gaunt. The ring carried the Peveril family crest, the Resurrection Stone, one of the 3 Deathly Hallows. Though Tom never realized its true nature, to him it was simply a powerful symbol of his heritage and dominance. He used the murder of his father to turn that ring into his second Horcrux, but the act came with consequences. Each split made his soul weaker, more distorted. The once handsome young man began to lose the very humanity he'd once used to manipulate others. Slytherin's Locket and the Muggle Sacrifice. The next Horcrux came from one of the Hogwarts founders themselves, Salazar Slytherin's Locket. It had originally belonged to the Gaunt family, passed down through generations as proof of their pure blood lineage and connection to Slytherin. After Tom Riddle framed Morphin Gaunt for murder, the Ministry confiscated the Gaunt's possessions. The Locket eventually ended up with Merope Gaunt, Tom's mother. When she fled to London desperate and destitute, she sold the Locket to a woman named Caractacus Burke of Borgin and Burkes for a mere 10 galleons, the wizarding world's equivalent of pawning the Mona Lisa for bus fare. Years later, as a charming young man working for that same shop, Tom Riddle tracked the Locket down. He learned that it had been purchased by Hepzibah Smith, an elderly collector of magical antiques, and he began plotting to reclaim what he saw as rightfully his. But before that murder would happen, Voldemort still needed another victim. At some point after leaving Hogwarts, he used the murder of a random muggle to perform the dark ritual and turn the Locket into a Horcrux. Imagine being that random muggle, living your normal life, and suddenly a noseless man in a cloak asks for directions to immortality, and the last thing you hear is boom, congrats, you're a Horcrux now. The details of that victim's identity were never recorded, and that's exactly how Voldemort wanted it. For him, it wasn't about who died. It was about proving that he could kill without hesitation, without emotion, without consequence. The locket itself carried deep symbolic meaning. It was a relic of his bloodline, Slytherin's power reborn inside him. When worn, it projected a sense of cold pride, isolation, and corruption, a perfect reflection of the man who made it. This Horcrux would later find its way through generations of theft and betrayal, hidden behind walls, around necks, and in the hearts of those it poisoned. Hufflepuff's cup and Hepzibah. Tom Riddle had always been obsessed with power, but more than that, with legacy. He wanted artifacts that once belonged to the founders of Hogwarts, because in his mind they symbolized destiny. He already had Slytherin's locket and the Gaunt ring. The next target was a relic of another founder, Helga Hufflepuff's cup. By this point, Riddle was working at Borgin & Burke's, using his charm and intelligence to gain access to the possessions of wealthy witches and wizards. That's how he met Hepzibah Smith, a cheerful, somewhat vain collector who loved showing off her treasures. When Riddle visited her home one afternoon, Hepzibah proudly revealed two of her most valuable items: Hufflepuff's cup, said to have belonged to Helga herself, and Slytherin's locket, which she'd bought years earlier. For Tom, it was the perfect storm. Both relics he coveted sitting inches away. Hepzibah trusted him completely, but that same evening she was found dead, poisoned. Her house elf Hoki was framed for the murder. Her memories were twisted until it looked like she'd poisoned her own mistress. The locket and the cup were gone, probably the fastest thank you for the tea exit in wizarding history. Using Hepzibah's death, Riddle created his next Horcrux, Hufflepuff's cup. The choice wasn't random. Hufflepuff represented loyalty, fairness, and kindness. By corrupting that symbol, Voldemort was mocking the very traits he despised. After the murder, Riddle vanished. The cup eventually made its way into the vault of Bellatrix Lestrange at Gringotts, buried beneath layers of curses and dragon-guarded gold. But that moment in Hepzibah's sitting room marked something important. Voldemort had stopped pretending to be human. He was no longer hiding behind charm or ambition. Now he was a collector of souls, and his own was nearly beyond saving. Ravenclaw's Diadem. The story of Ravenclaw's Diadem is one of the most mysterious pieces of wizarding history, and it became one of Voldemort's most hidden Horcruxes. The diadem once belonged to Rowena Ravenclaw, said to grant the wearer enhanced wisdom. But centuries earlier, it was stolen by her daughter, Helena Ravenclaw, who fled to Albania out of jealousy and pride. After her death, murdered by the Bloody Baron, the diadem was lost to time. While many believed it gone forever, Tom Riddle uncovered the legend while still at Hogwarts. He questioned the Grey Lady, Helena's ghost, charming her into revealing what she had never told another living soul, that the diadem still rested in a forest in Albania. Tom promised to find it and keep her secret, proof that even in death, people still fall for toxic charmers. Years later, after creating multiple Horcruxes, he fulfilled that promise, not out of loyalty, but out of greed. Voldemort traveled to Albania, where he found the diadem hidden in a hollow tree, exactly where Helena had left it centuries before. To complete the ritual, he murdered a local peasant, a random villager whose only crime was crossing paths with the wrong traveler. Imagine explaining that in the afterlife. Yeah, I died because some guy was trying to grow his nose again. That life, insignificant to Voldemort, became the price for eternal wisdom, twisted into eternal damnation. Once transformed, the diadem became more than a symbol of intelligence. It became a mirror of corruption. What once amplified wisdom now amplified madness. Voldemort later hid it inside Hogwarts itself, in the Room of Requirement, convinced no one would ever find it. It would remain there for decades, unnoticed by thousands of students, until a boy named Harry Potter unknowingly laid eyes on it half a century later. The accidental Horcrux. By 1981, Voldemort believed he was invincible. He had split his soul 6 times, far beyond what any wizard could survive, and each Horcrux made him harder to kill. But there was one prophecy he couldn't ignore. It spoke of a child born as the 7th month dies, who would have the power to defeat him. Voldemort became obsessed with stopping that prophecy before it could unfold. 2 babies fit the description, Neville Longbottom and Harry Potter. But Voldemort chose Harry, believing their shared half-blood heritage made the boy a greater threat. Somewhere out there, Neville just dodged the deadliest bullet in magical history. On October 31st, 1981, he traveled to Godric's Hollow, where James and Lily Potter were hiding under the Fidelius charm. Peter Pettigrew had already betrayed them. Voldemort killed James first without hesitation. Then came Lily, who refused to stand aside. died. Her choice to die protecting her son, a pure act of love, triggered an ancient magic Voldemort didn't understand. When he cast the killing curse on baby Harry, it backfired. The curse destroyed Voldemort's body, but his fragmented soul, already unstable from too many divisions, reacted violently. One stray fragment looked around and said, "Guess I live here now." Harry became an accidental Horcrux, something Voldemort never intended to create and could never sense. That connection linked them for years, shared visions, thoughts, even the ability to speak Parseltongue. It also explains why Harry had to die later for Voldemort to be defeated. The fragment inside him had to be destroyed before Voldemort could be mortal again. In his arrogance, Voldemort's greatest mistake wasn't the curse. It was creating the one Horcrux that could one day destroy him, Nagini and Bertha Jorkins. By the time Voldemort returned to physical form in the mid-1990s, his soul was barely human. He needed a body again, and one last Horcrux to protect what remained of his immortality. That final vessel would be his closest companion, Nagini. At this point, calling him half-human was generous. He was basically evil Wi-Fi. Before she was a serpent, Nagini had been a maledictus, a witch cursed to eventually transform permanently into a snake. Centuries later, she was living in Albania, where Voldemort's disembodied spirit wandered after his fall. She became his protector and his link to the physical world, feeding him, keeping him alive, and later acting as both weapon and confidant. You know your social life's over when your best friend is a snake, literally. When Voldemort learned of Bertha Jorkins, a ministry employee who had stumbled upon secrets in Albania, he captured and tortured her for information about the upcoming Triwizard Tournament and the wizarding world he'd left behind. Once he extracted everything he wanted, he murdered her, using her death to perform the ritual that would bind part of his soul to Nagini. Unlike his other Horcruxes, this one was alive, a living creature completely loyal to him. Through Nagini, Voldemort could see, strike, and even speak in Parseltongue, but this closeness also made her the most dangerous Horcrux of all. When she was killed by Neville Longbottom with the Sword of Gryffindor during the Battle of Hogwarts, Voldemort's final safeguard shattered. Nagini's death marked the end of Voldemort's false immortality. Every piece of his soul had been destroyed, leaving only the man who feared death more than anything, now forced to face it completely alone. Now, let's talk about Voldemort and the puzzle of the Elder Wand. The next lesson at Stickman Hogwarts, all 14 Masters of the Elder Wand explained. Snape's waiting. Click now before he gives you detention.